Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Ali Colley.
Come on, Pip. Up you go. Come on. She will. She'll get up in a minute. Come on. That's it.
Yeah.
Hi.
Ali, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to St Mary's and welcome to Sundays at 7. Your life journey and life story so far has been a roller coaster ride, to say the least. And you've had to cope with a number of very painful events that have inevitably changed and affected your life. As the interview develops, I hope we can cover some of those events that will maybe challenge and help some people here tonight. So let's start at the very beginning. You told me, lovely family childhood, special memories of Christmas, long chats with your mum, fun times with your dad, who was a policeman during the riots and the miners' strikes, brought up in the Christian faith, committed your life to Jesus at the age of 5, and baptized at 10. Tell me a bit more about some of those things I've just mentioned.
Well, I think one of the questions you asked me when we were preparing for the interview was sort of key moments in childhood. And you automatically then think, what big events have happened in childhood? What do I remember? But actually for me, it wasn't the big things, it was the little things, which is why I sort of mentioned, like I used to have, my mum was a stay-at-home mum back then, that was the norm. And I used to come home from school, mum would be cooking, she's always cooking, and even now, and I'd sit on the kitchen workbench and we'd have a natter about the day, and that was very, you don't realise it at the time, but things like that are the things that stabilise you, and we talk about everything from, childhood things to the Lord. Equally, my memories of Dad, my dad was always my hero. He was, still is. And I grew up knowing that my dad was a very brave man. He was a man of integrity and he was an honest man. And I think that honesty kind of filtered its way through into me, and brutally honest at times. But it gave me a love for things like the story of David, where we learned that David was a man after God's own heart. And there's lots you could go into if you look at the story of David as to why he's a man after God's own heart. But I remember as a child, the thing that got me was that David was honest with God. If you read the Psalms, many of David's Psalms are no holes barred. God, this is difficult and I can't do it. And I'm even angry with you, God. But eventually David would come through and go, but actually you're sovereign and you reign supreme and you've got this. And so I think when you reflect on life, it's those moments, and the fact that my parents at the time, again, I didn't realise it when I was a child, but they would have been very young in their faith. I think my mum and dad were saved when I was 3 or thereabouts. They can correct me if I'm wrong. So as I was growing up, they would have been growing up in their faith, and there were lots of exciting things that we were told, miracles that happened when Dad was out on the riots, things like he'd go out with his men and he'd be the only sergeant to come back with all his men intact, so people were asking to go on his team, and memories like that as a child you don't forget and cement your outlook in terms of understanding that God is real and God is bigger than we can imagine.
As a teenager, you were strong and forthright in your faith, and bullied for it, which I've heard many, many times. You said that faith develops as you grow, and there are many points where you can follow different paths. One particular path for you was travelling to Germany on your own at the age of 15 and learning to rely on God for yourself. Tell me what happened.
Well, obviously back then, again, no internet, no phones. So travelling to Germany on my own at 15 was quite a big deal. I was going to be away from family for the first time. Effectively flying solo, although I was going to stay with a pen friend's family. I wasn't going to stay on my own anywhere. But it felt it felt like a step towards independence, I suppose. And I remember not long before I went, and I was just excited. I don't remember feeling nervous or anything like that. But a great aunt of mine, who was a godly lady, a prayerful lady, she said, have a read of Psalm 139, Ali. So I don't remember reading it beforehand, but I got on the plane on my own and I got my Bible out because I suddenly realised I was terrified of flying. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going up in the air. And I don't know whether it was my first time on a plane. It might have been, I can't remember. But it was certainly the first time I remember. And I sat there on the plane reading Psalm 139, and it was, oh Lord, you search me and know me. You know my sitting down and rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off and are acquainted with all my ways. But it goes on to say that we can't go anywhere without God. If we ascend into heaven, he's there. And if we make our bed in hell, behold, God is there. And I'm flying up in the aeroplane thinking, oh, good, you're here, God, too. Get me to the other side. And I found peace. But really, as you reflect on your faith journey, I think that's the first time where I had to stretch and think about my faith in isolation from my family. Because I think as a child that had grown up in the faith, you have to then make your own steps. You can't rely on your parents' faith. And that's my first memory of thinking, actually, God is with me as an individual.
I mentioned about the ups and downs of life. And one of those events was getting married at the age of 20. Can you tell me how that happened and the hurt you suffered when it fell apart?
Yeah, so I've known the guy that I married since I was, 13, I think. And he was a worship leader at the church. He came from a Christian family who were all at the church. At the time, people were cheering for our marriage because my father was an elder in the church. His father was, doing whatever he did in the church, and it just seemed like, a match. It took me by surprise when 2 years later he had an affair and accelerated very quickly. Our marriage dissolved, and I had no choice. He was not interested in reconciliation, so I suddenly found myself alone, but we'd also moved to Bristol, so I was alone, but in Bristol away from family. And I sort of remember thinking, like, no family, no friends, husband's left me. And I used to sleep on the couch then because it was too hard to sleep in the bed. And I remember saying to God, I'm not so sure whether I believe in you now. I'm not so sure. It just doesn't feel like you're real. I don't know, I can't feel you. It doesn't feel like, this is how I am. And if you really want me to carry on in the faith, you're going to have to show me that you're real. And I was sort of practicing that kind of honesty with God approach. And then I felt a physical hand on my shoulder. And Jesus just said to me, I'm here.
I was going to come on to that because you said at that point you were left reeling. and questioning your faith.
Yes.
But Jesus showed up for you.
Yeah.
Tell me just how difficult that time was and exactly how he showed up. Because we can talk about these things, and I'm sure there's people here know what you mean, but it's actually explaining how you feel at the time.
So, obviously you feel abandoned. As a Christian lady, I think everybody gets married and expects it to last. I don't think people get married and don't expect it to last. But I had no concept in my mind whatsoever that marriage could end. I came from a very stable home and my parents had a very stable marriage. He came from a very stable home and parents' marriage. There was no divorce in the church at all at the time. In fact, it was quite frowned on in the church circles where we worked. So I was sort of dealing with the people's opinions as well. Without meaning to ever be unkind, very often people have opinions and they're not always helpful. And there was a lot of unhelpful opinions happening. And obviously I was broken and felt really like the rubbish that had been thrown out on the street. And I suppose that's how I felt.
Ali, there will be some people here tonight who will know what it's like to suffer from a broken marriage and feeling abandoned. Did it take you a long time to move on from it?
So, well, physically and practically, it was 5 years before I met, from the marriage dissolving, before I met and married Greg. So in time-wise, it was 5 years. I think at the time, it felt like a long time. Obviously, there's things like anger, why me? I think I first realised, I think the first thing I realised was that I needed to stop loving him and that I needed to forgive him. And I knew that was what the Bible said I had to do. But I don't think I didn't feel like I wanted to forgive him at the time. So I took my honest approach again. And I used to say that with the big feelings, and I'd just say, God, I actually don't want to forgive him, but I know that your word says that I have to forgive him. And I know that that's what I need to do to get where I need to be. So therefore, I need your help. And bit by bit, I got to the stage where I thought, well, actually, I realised actually both choosing to love and choosing not to love are an act of the will. They're not, when we marry, we actively choose to love our husband or wife, if you're a man. And equally, I had to choose not to love him. It wasn't just a feeling that would go away, it was an action. So I had to choose that was what was happening now. And I did that. And then I also realised that forgiveness isn't this feeling that's going to suddenly wash over me. Forgiveness is also an active word. And I had to take action. So it was okay, Lord, I submit to your will. You've said that I've got to forgive here. Right, okay. I actively choose to forgive him. And it was that process. But it sounds very quick when you talk in words, but it was over the course of 3-4 years.
As you say, eventually you met and married Greg.
Yes.
And you had 4 children. Mm-hmm. Joe, who is 17, Elijah and Ethan, who are twins and 14, and Hope, who died at the age of just 9. Tell me about Joe, Elijah and Ethan, who are here tonight, and they all have a strong faith. So you're going to have to be careful what you say. Yeah,
very careful. I've promised them I won't embarrass them. No.
What are they doing?
Again, Greg and I tried for 5 years to have our children. We had lots of hoops to jump through before Joe came along. But thankfully, Joe was born when I was 35. So you can work out how old I am now, I've just told you. And he was natural birth and just a delight. And then Hope and the boys came along very quickly. So early on, I had 4 children aged 3 and under. So that was fun.
Wow.
But I was delighted because we'd tried, it had been so difficult to have children. They've gone on their own journey. They all had their own individual relationship with Hope, and they, in their time, will have their own story to tell about that. But fast forward to this day, me and Greg are so proud of them. They are all growing up very strong. They are strong physically, but they're strong emotionally and spiritually, and they are all doing really well. They're all sporty. They all like fighting. So Joe's a boxer. Ethan and Elijah do Thai boxing. And Joe's applied to be in the RAF. So we're just part way through that journey now. So yeah, they're great.
Well, I've met all 3 of them tonight. They're 3 fine lads.
They are
You
amazing.
and Greg are doing and have done and will continue to do a fine job.
No.
In the second part, we're going to talk about Hope's therapy dogs. But to end this first part, can you tell me in your own words what happened to Hope?
Okay. So Hope was the middle child. So she was 14 months younger than Joseph. So when she was 7 and the boys were either side of that, Hope was diagnosed with a brain tumour. I'd been watching her for about a year. She had all sorts of random symptoms that in isolation you wouldn't necessarily think was anything major. But by the Christmas just before her diagnosis, things had intensified and she was dizzy, she was lethargic, she had headaches. She was waking up in the morning and being sick, but for a long time we'd not realised because she was an amazing girl, and one of the things she used to do was go to the toilet, be sick and clean it up before I woke up. So it took me a long time to cotton on to what was happening. And then over the Christmas 2015, she was sick every morning, and 2nd of January 2016, something inside me just snapped, and I said, Greg, we're taking her to hospital. So we took her to hospital, and she was very quickly rushed through and diagnosed with a brain tumour. We were told that there were 3 different sorts of brain tumours on the brain stem that she could have had. Hope ended up with the worst kind, that was the most aggressive and required surgery, radiotherapy and chemotherapy. We were then told that the treatment would be the harshest form of treatment that any cancer can receive, and it would be particularly grueling for Hope. She had the surgery to remove the brain tumour. Then she had 5 weeks of radiotherapy on her brain and spine because it was a central nervous system tumour. That caused her to lose her hair. She had a central line, and she had a peg in her tummy. I don't know if you know what they are, for feeding. And then she had chemotherapy for the best part of 8 months. I won't go into it all, but there was all sorts of side effects, all sorts of other horrible things that went with it. And then by the Christmas that year, we thought that she was in remission. Well, she was in remission. So we began to make plans to get her a dog to help her with her rehabilitation.
Did she ask for a dog? Did she?
She'd not asked for. Well, she wanted a dog, but she didn't expect one. I suppose that's the best way of putting it. She'd come across a dog at Clatterbridge Hospital that had helped her, called Callie, and Callie was a therapy dog, and that was kind of our introduction to it. So we thought we'd get Pippa a dog, we'd get Hope a dog, and Pippa can help her through the rehabilitation. But then just before we got Pippa, we learned that Hope had relapsed, and the cancer had spread to her bones, and she broke her hip, and she had to have surgery. So at that point, I was thinking, I don't think I can have a puppy as well. But the oncologist, family and friends all said, no, get her a dog, go ahead with it. And we had an awful lot of support there. So we did go ahead with it, and Pippa is Hope's dog. Hope had another year's worth of treatment, equally as horrific, if not worse, than the first year. And then we lost her on February the 6th, 2018. But Hope went to be with Jesus. She had a very strong faith, and she loved him to the end.
And I'm sure getting Pippa was exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Ali, did you receive a lot of support during and after Hope's illness? And why did you tell me that you didn't struggle with your own faith, but you did struggle with some people?
Wow, big question. So I suppose quick answer about the help. Yes, we had, during Hope's illness, there was quite an army of people, both family, friends and church friends rallied round, doing all sorts, lots of very practical things. In our immediate family, Mum and Dad played tag team with us at hospital, so they were very much present for a lot of Hope's very difficult moments. After Hope died, it was different. What you need to understand is that there'd been such an army investing time and energy into Hope's recovery, we hoped, but also into our family, into keeping our family running. Because actually, when a family is coping with something like cancer, and you've got half your family at hospital and half at home, it's to just keep the workings of the family going is quite tricky. So we'd had all this investment. Lots within the church, we'd had lots of prayer investment and lots of people hoping and praying, and obviously we were, that Hope would be healed. And then she died, and there was the funeral and the celebration. After she died, after the celebration, everyone is then left reeling. And although obviously we were her parents, there were many, many people in the community that were grieving Hope's death. And so it became quite difficult for people to help us. I think people don't know what to say. They don't know how to be. And actually, the people that were close to us were also exhausted because of the physical demands of helping us. So it became different, and we had help from organisations like Care for the Family, who actually run a bereavement programme for parents who've been bereaved, and that was very helpful. And then, sorry, what was the second half? And
you
why
did struggle with some people and doctrine. Yes,
so there is we did have people visit us. Again, if you understand, the community wanted Hope to be well. So there's a lot of people thinking, how are we going to get this little girl well? That was the motivation, I believe, from what was behind it. But some people approached us and said, well, you're not lacking in faith, because they knew that I believed with all my heart that God could heal. So it must be your sin. You must have sin in your life, and that must be why Hope was ill and why she died. And what is tricky there is that as a grieving parent, and in fact a parent helping a child who is ill, you're already looking to yourself thinking, what else can I do to help my child get well?
Yeah.
So if somebody says to you, you must be in sin, you're already wondering if there's something you're doing wrong. So it's very unhelpful. We had people telling us that it was because of the fields that were behind our house, fertilizer, lots of things like that, that just kind of complicate the grieving process, I suppose. And then things like going into church and hearing the music was difficult, because every song reminded us of hope. Yeah. And there were weeks when we just couldn't face being in church. And then for my own personal walk, I never once doubted that God is who he says he is. There was never a question. But actually, I'd gone on my own walk of faith through Hope's illness, and there were things that I had believed God had spoken to me. And I came to understand, I now understand that God was showing me something different than how I'd heard it. But at the time, I was asking God to show me what I was missing, and he never came. I was asking God to tell me whether Hope needed to live or needed to die, because I thought God had told me that she would live. And he didn't show up for me like that. So it's like, well, okay, I've walked this walk where I've always heard your voice, Lord. But if the things that I am hearing are not not exactly as you're saying them, then where does it sit in my relationship with you? Because actually, my walk with God isn't just about this sort of grey faith. It's about a walk and a relationship. But if in a relationship you're hearing wrong, then there's something amiss in the relationship. So it's like everything's been thrown up in the air, and you're sort of then left working out which bits to catch, if you like, with faith. Get it. And it's it's a process and a walk that you do with God.
Yeah. Your family problems didn't end with Hope's tragic death, did they? Because your husband Greg's business went into liquidation a year after Hope's death, and you nearly lost your home. So tell me about God's faithfulness during that period, because you must have been hanging on by your fingernails.
I think it's strange, isn't it? To be honest, I don't remember feeling worried. And I wonder whether some of that was because I was so overwhelmed with grief that there wasn't much else that could touch us. But it's only in hindsight that you sort of take a step back. I think it was talking to the lads, and now we're in a comfortable position. But at the time, we were on the brink of losing the house. Don't know how, but we always managed to pay the mortgage. I don't know where the money came from. We always did have food on the table, but don't know how we managed to pay for the food. It was that kind of thing. But you look back and you think, well, God has... At the time, you wish he'd come in with a great big dollop of cash and sort you out. It didn't work like that. But actually looking back, you think, well, God's kept us. Somehow we're still here. The boys are still here. We are, and now both Greg and I have got good jobs, good incomes, and it works. And that's where his faithfulness is. It's like we didn't see it, we didn't know it was happening, but he is there and he still works, you know.
Now, tell me about the charity Hope's Heart and the business Hope's Therapy Dogs. How did that come about?
I've told you a little bit about Pippa. Pippa became Hope's therapy dog while she was in the end stages of her life. And so from 8 weeks old, Pippa was with Hope. She was sat on her knee. She was wherever Hope was. If Hope was at home, Pippa was with her. Even to the end, Pippa was on a deathbed with her. But towards the end of her life, Hope was the kind of girl, in fact she all she ever wanted to do was help other people. That was just in her. Everything was about everybody else being okay. And if she thought everybody else was okay, no matter what was happening to her, she was all right. And she said to me, Mum, will you train Pippa to be a dog that helps other children? So after she died, a few months after, when I felt like I could face it, I contacted the charity that Hope had met a therapy dog through. So that charity was Therapy Dogs Nationwide. And Pippa, I'd trained Pippa for them, and we used to, that first year, we volunteered in the school that had been Hope's school with the boys, still there. And I was working with Hope's class who were struggling to come to terms with Hope's death. So I used to go in and chat to them about Hope and just sort of let them see Pippa, because Pippa had been Hope's dog, and they, that kind of thing. Fast forward, because it would take me all night, I took on a job establishing a therapy dog service in a behavioural special school with a deputy head's dog, did loads of training, loads of different things. And then that job came to a natural end, and the head teacher of Hope's school said, Ali, you need to take this with Pippa and offer your services. So I genuinely, because of the experiences we'd had with Greg's business, I really wasn't thinking about having my own business. I would have run a mile, to be honest. But we needed an income, so business it is and was. And so I set myself up. I wrote to a few schools that had contacts with. They all said, yes, please. And by the end of the first year, I was fully booked with Hope's Therapy Dogs. Gave it the name Hope's Therapy Dogs because of Hope. End of the first year, I took my first staff member on, and we've now got 3 staff members and me. But in the course of my job, obviously, I work with children, supporting the children's emotional and mental health. So I have a lot to do with the mental health of children in schools. There are currently 1 in 6 children with a diagnosed mental health condition in schools across England. That's the government statistics. They believe it's more like 1 in 3 or 4 without a diagnosis. So it's significant, and staff within schools are struggling because teachers are having to be a little bit like psychiatric nurses at times with the children that are in there, and children need that support. So I very quickly learned that, yes, I need the business, and the business is flourishing, and we need that to continue. With every school that takes our services for a session a week, we help 30 more children that year. So we're continuing to expand, and we're continuing to grow the business. But we also need more, and I don't think the business on its own can provide everything that's needed. So last year, just before Christmas, my dad's the legal brain in the family, so my dad got the charitable articles sorted out for us for Hope's Heart, the charity. We called it Hope's Heart because we believe that would be Hope's Heart to do. And the charitable articles are such that we will support the emotional and mental health of children and young people, hopefully across Britain. And we will, through the provision of therapy dogs, art therapy, music therapy, and other therapies as we are able, so that children can have access to more than therapy dogs. Because obviously therapy dogs are great. Working with a trained therapist, that's great, but it isn't always the right fit for a child. So we need more, and that's the drive, and that's how we've got the 2.
The charity has grown, the business has grown, and earlier this year, you won the BBC Make a Difference Award for your work.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I got a call out of the blue. Well, in fact, I think I got to know some people at the radio because I went on and did an article for them earlier in the year about Hope's Heart. And they then rang me and said that I was now a finalist for BBC Make a Difference Awards. So they then came to St Aidan's, where Hope had been, and watched me work, which you can't do. You can't very easily do a therapy session on the telly. So it was interesting, but it was, and we did an interview, quite like this really, except we didn't talk about my faith. We just talked about the business side of it. And then, we went to an evening early September and with family and my staff, and we were very surprised. I was very surprised and in shock that we won, and it means an awful lot. I think the fact that it is Make a Difference Awards, and that's what we're trying to do, is make a difference. Very much. It's that scripture where if you've got it in your hand to do, you go and do it, don't you? That's biblical principle. If you can change something, you change it, and so that's what we're trying to do. And just that somebody had recognised that we were doing that was great.
I think it's right and incredible that you won the award, but I think it's right that you won it not just because of the dogs, but because of the life that you've had and the way you've handled the whole thing. Not just for you, but for other children and for dogs and so on. It really is a great award, justly deserved, I'm sure. Now, there's just a couple of final things, really important, I want to ask you. You said to me, I want to talk about the absolute faithfulness of God and my certainty in him in spite of being overwhelmed with grief and the demands of life. What would you like to say to people here tonight?
I think, I don't know, I mean, you might have got the idea by now that things are not, that I've not always necessarily had the right reaction straight away. I don't think you do when you face difficulties. And I think the older I've got, the more aware I am of the times when I don't react right, and when I know, or when I'm struggling with something, or when things are difficult, but yet how big God is, and how despite our frailties and our weaknesses, God is able. And there is that scripture that sort of says, he who's begun a work in us will complete it until the day of salvation. And I can see, I think there's an advantage to getting older. Not that I'm old, but I know I'm getting, I'm on, I'm not a young person anymore, and you can see the hand of God over the years, and I can see his faithfulness in my boys. I can see his faithfulness in my husband, my family, the fact that I came from a family that had given me the strength to be able to cope with what I had. I see so many children who just don't stand a chance, and they're expected to be able to cope with such horrific traumas, and they've got no grounding, no basis. And there's that thing that says, to him who much has been given, much will be required. And I think, well, I know I was given a lot. I know that my upbringing was second to none. I know very few people who had as nice an upbringing as me. But that comes with expectations and responsibilities. You don't get to have those things. And I can see that, God's plan is still working. And when I'm working with children and seeing changes in their lives, and seeing that God's just dropped me in there for that second, like it's a God thing, it's not a me thing. I had a child who came from a very troubled home and used to go and hide on the trampoline when things got tricky inside the house, and really neglected, lots and lots of things going on. And this one day, he came into my session on a Monday morning and he said, Ali, did you know Jesus was real? Okay. This was in a secular school, it wasn't in a church school. So I said, oh, well, I did, yeah. He says, do you know he came to see me last night? I said, pardon? He says, I was sitting on my trampoline and Jesus came and sat with me and he put his arm around me and he looked after me. And then he told me all about the Bible. And you know, he then sat and told me from Genesis to Revelation, including the birth and death of Jesus and resurrection, and the child had given his life to Jesus then. But he'd then gone in and told his mum, and his mum had laughed at him. So he came. Then he came into my session, and he's like, he could have gone into class and told his teacher, who wouldn't have. But he came into my session and just happened to be a Christian person in the room, and so I was able to say, "Wow, that's amazing," and I was able to talk to him about Jesus. But like, that's God, isn't it? God puts the right things in place at the right time, and that's his faithfulness. And that's how he has even the tiniest, this little boy that probably no one else knows about, but Jesus knows about him. And he's gone visiting him when no one else can.
You've answered the final question in what you've said. I was merely going to say, if you had one verse to leave us with tonight, but you've mentioned so many, haven't you?
I've mentioned too many.
No, not at all. The ones you've mentioned fitted it so well. She is amazing. She really, really, really is. I can see when you've brought her in tonight, people's faces, and how beautifully behaved she is, how much she loves you, how much she must have loved Hope, and Hope's memory carries on in some way through her. It's a privilege to do what I do. I've always said that. Oh. To sit here and listen to people like you and your story and your strength. And thank you so much for coming here tonight and for bringing the family as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Ali Colley.
Oh, that's so cute. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.